Hey guys, welcome back. Wanted to, I guess, kind of cleanse the palate a little bit, continue with the palate cleansers that we've been doing the past few episodes. And today I'm reviewing The Passion of the Christ from 2004, directed and co written by Mel Gibson and Benedict Fitzgerald. They were co writers on this. Before we get into the film, I want to kind of clear out what this isn't going to be. And this, I don't want to, so many of the reviews on this movie are either criticisms from Christian scholars or from people who are Christians, or it's sort of a, constant relitigation of the very public troubles that Mel Gibson has had over the years. So it's not going to be that. I'm not here to, again, judge or sort of litigate the life of Mel Gibson. This is all about uh, reviewing what I think is a really great movie, and I think an exceptional depiction of at least the last, was it 12 or 24 hours of the character of Jesus. And, this is about reviewing a film and a piece of art. I am not going to, I'm going to try to limit this to just that and not be making commentary about theology or contemporary politics or those types of things. That's going to be hard to do. I might do an extra for that with Cult of Man, but I really just want to discuss the film and why I think people should see it, why I think it's a great film, and so forth. One other note: there was when this film came out, and there is still some discussion around whether or not this film is anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish. And as someone who saw this movie a long time ago, I think I maybe saw this film maybe 2, 3, 4 years after it came out, and I only just recently rewatched it a few days ago. I don't see the anti-Semitism in this film. Obviously the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin in the film don't like Jesus. They don't like Christ. They don't believe he is the Messiah, and that's just a matter of history of religion and all of those things. That doesn't make it an anti-Semitic film at all. There's plenty of villains to go around in this film, not the least of which are also the Romans and so forth. So I want to get that sort of aired out first so that we can just discuss this film just as a piece of great cinema. So that said, Passion of the Christ. I myself am not a believer. I was raised Catholic. I am no longer Catholic. I am no longer a believer. Just to kind of put it out there, I'm an Aristotelian, objectivist, non-theist. That said, I'm capable of enjoying a movie about Jesus Christ. I actually like religious films. I love films that have themes or traces of apocalyptic religion in them. I think it's a really powerful story, whether it be the book of Revelations or the story of Christ or any of the prophets, to be quite frank. It is a part of human culture and human history. Whether or not, these people exist, I personally think that Christ probably did exist. And I think probably a fair amount of these prophets, did exist. As to what exactly happened, I don't know. I'm not a theologian or a religious historian on that. I do think that they're powerful stories, and what I took away from The Passion of the Christ, now probably at least 20 years since I last saw it, is probably a bit different than when I first saw the film. And I really just feel that because Mel Gibson is such a passionate Christian, he's also an incredibly talented actor and filmmaker. I think that's what allowed him to make such a truly epic, beautiful film about a figure that for him is incredibly important, and is incredibly important for billions of people around the world. So while I don't necessarily share those particular viewpoints, it doesn't mean that I can't have respect for religion as a type of early form of philosophy, and that I can't enjoy this film because it is a masterclass in not just religious film, but just, I think, any type of Well, I guess, yeah, for religious film, for any type of human myth, this is how you do it. The character of Christ for me it hits a lot harder now in light of so many of the things we're talking about in the culture. Um, you know, establishment versus upstarts, establishment versus rebels, um, concepts of compassion, and so forth. I see in Jim Caviezel's just amazing portrayal of Jesus. I see a truly compassionate, kind, loving teacher. Whether or not you believe he is the Son of God and the Savior of the world, that's up for you to decide. But it's a beautiful, beautiful portrayal, and it covers basically Christ's life from after the Last Supper at Gethsemane, where Christ is in the forest, in the wilderness. He is sweating blood, as I believe is straight out of the Gospels. And, he is asking God why he has forsaken him. Satan appears in the garden and releases a serpent towards him. Christ crushes the head of the serpent, which I don't think is actually biblically accurate. I think that actually is it from Genesis or Revelation? I'm not sure, but I've heard a few commentators and reviewers talk about that particular scene as creative license on the part of Gibson. Uh, it works as far as I'm concerned, and it takes us from Jesus in Gethsemane and him being sold out by Judas and arrested by the Romans and brought before, is it the Sanhedrin or the Pharisees? Sorry, to face judgment. And of course, they want to get rid of him because he's an upstart and he's a threat to their power. They just, they don't like him. They don't believe that he is the Messiah. And they bring him to Pontius Pilate, who was, of course, the man who doesn't really want to necessarily get involved in this. He kind of sees this as, this is a Jewish matter. And historically, during the time, there were tons of Jewish rebellions that were going on at the time of the Roman Empire. The Romans were always trying to put down those rebellions and maintain, their particular order. And so Jesus is kind of like this ping pong ball between his own leadership within the Jewish tribe and the Romans that don't really want to be involved in this. Ultimately, Pontius Pilate's hand is forced and he condemns Jesus to death. All while we are basically tracking this timeline from Gethsemane all the way to the crucifixion and ultimately the resurrection. We see the mother of Jesus, who is played by Mary, is played by Maya Morgenstern, and the great Monica Bellucci, who plays Mary Magdalene. We see them witnessing basically the stations of the cross that Christ goes through as he's carrying his cross, and he's being whipped and he's being beaten, and it's really, really vicious, and it's really hard to look at. And again, whether you're a believer or not, how anybody could possibly watch this film and not be moved and not be affected and be just viscerally reminded of the absolute inhumanity that human beings are capable of, and just how vicious Roman punishments were. So many of us guys, we love Roman history and all of that. This film is a good reminder of just how barbaric the Romans could be, and frankly, the aspects of barbarism that every civilization had at that time. No one was immune from that. But again, whether you believe Christ was a teacher or you believe he was a prophet and he was the Messiah and he was the Son of God, is almost kind of immaterial. You just watch this man go through what he was going through and not giving up his people. And it's very moving. There has been, I've read some criticisms that, well, why couldn't he have shown, that is Gibson and company, why couldn't they have shown us more of him performing miracles and doing these things? There's a bit of that. There are great flashbacks of Jesus working as a carpenter, and him just having just casual talks with his mother Mary. There's a couple flashbacks of Christ as a child, and how Mary, as a mother, is concerned for her baby Jesus, or her I think it was toddler Jesus, and him running around and him tripping and her picking him up, and then it flashes forward to the present when he is carrying his cross and bloodied and ultimately going to his death. It's beautifully done. There is a lot of slow motion done in this film that gives it a really beautiful, dreamlike quality. I believe the entire film, I think a lot of, at least the exteriors, were done in Italy. And I think maybe some of the interiors, like the shots of the temple and so forth, were done, I think, maybe here in Hollywood, in LA. But I think the rest was done in Italy. And I think a lot of the actors were Italian. Speaking of that, there's the accomplishment of doing this entire film in the Aramaic language, Latin, and Hebrew is also really, really impressive. I read somewhere that Gibson initially didn't want it to be subtitled in any language. He wanted people to watch, and so much of, at least in the West, what was, I guess, Christendom, you would say, in Christian countries, probably, or countries that have majority Christian populations, most people would probably gather what was going on. Ultimately, somebody convinced him, hey, people might miss some of the finer nuances of what was being said. And ultimately, Gibson decided to go with subtitles, which is good. Because, there are so many bits and pieces there that would have been lost if it wasn't subtitled. I know a little bit of Latin, but I know zero Aramaic. I know no Hebrew. And so much would have been lost if it had not been subtitled. There are two moments in the film, and not to spoil it for you, but most of you probably know a lot of the story already. And I'm not spoiling it necessarily, because you kind of know what's going to happen. I said it starts at Gethsemane and it ends with the crucifixion. So there's a moment, again, from the point that Jesus is arrested in the garden all the way to, again, the crucifixion. The film is interspersed with these flashbacks of Jesus talking with his disciples, of Jesus talking with his mother as a slightly younger man than he is when he goes, to his death. And then again, at least one scene where we see Jesus as maybe like an 8 or 9-year-old boy. And these scenes are truly beautiful, and it creates a great contrast between the life that was and ultimately where this man's life led him. As a non-theist myself, I kind of have to try to be as objective as possible. That again, not a Christian, but I can sympathize with this man's life. I can sympathize that he seemed to want to lead people. He seemed to be a guy whose message, literally at the end of the day, was love. And I know people can argue as to whether that's, is that sort of what we'd call sort of that hippy dippy love, frivolous love, or just a true love of your fellow human being and your love of mankind, or further, a very specific type of God's love requiring, following of God's laws as handed down to Moses and so on and so forth. I don't know. But from where I'm standing, he did seem like a kind man who was teaching his disciples, and his ultimately what he wanted to teach humanity was to love. And I believe in one of the flashbacks, as Christ is hanging on the cross, and man, is that hard to watch. They show you everything. They show you him being whipped. They show you him getting hit with the cat of nine tails, him being flayed. They show you him being nailed through the hands onto the cross. Although historically, people believe that he probably wasn't nailed through the hands, because the hand is not enough to hold to hold someone up. They most likely probably went through the wrist, to hold people up. And again, this was commonplace among the Romans. I mean, they really were disgustingly creative with their torture and their punishments, and that's that films so many frames of this movie that I think it's something that we should not forget. Again, man's ability to be inhumane to each other. But Jesus, in one of the last flashbacks, I believe it's at the Last Supper or after the Last Supper, I think, Jesus is saying, above all, he sort of lists things of what we should be doing and how we should be living. And then he says something to the effect, and this above all, love each other. And that really struck me. In particular, because for the last 2 years, I've kind of dug back into the Abrahamic religions, not so much Judaism, but more Christianity and Islam. And there's so much there if you're looking at the words of Jesus or even Muhammad of love, mercy, mercy, love. And then I look out at the world and in the news and in social media, I see so little of it. I see so much of these religions being used as weapons against people. One person's particular sect demonizing another person's sect, using it as a way to, I guess, bolster your own lack of self-esteem and, showing how pious you are and how much better you are than, the guy or the gal down the street who, you don't think prays or isn't good enough or fine, all those things. And it just seemed like towards the end where he says, above all, love each other. It's just like, oh yeah, exactly. And it seems simple, but I guess for a lot of folks, it isn't. So many people that are jockeying for power or jockeying for their particular view of theology, or, well, what did Jesus really mean? Or what did Moses really mean? Or whatever the prophet may be. Yeah, that really hit me. There's one other scene that really struck me, and of all of the other reviews and critiques of this film that I watched in preparation for this video, nobody talked about it. There is, no, I think one person did, one guy. There's a scene where sort of the camera is on Mary Magdalene, and I know that there's debate about whether or not Mary Magdalene was a woman of ill repute, whether she was a prostitute, or she maybe wasn't. Maybe she was a disciple just like the other fellas. And, whether she was or she wasn't, I don't think it necessarily matters. But there's a scene where we see Mary in the flashback. She is crawling on the ground, and she is bruised and bloodied and dirtied, and she's clearly been pelted with something, or maybe by fists, and she's crawling, like trying to get her bearings and maybe trying to stand up, and she's kind of facing a group, and they look like the high priests, and they all have rocks, and you can see them walking towards her with the rocks in their hands. They're basically stoning her. Now, are they stoning her because she was a prostitute? Are they stoning her because maybe somebody lied about her reputation, which happened in those days, happens today? Who knows? But in that frame, you're sort of on the ground with Mary Magdalene, and you see these men in their robes with these rocks getting ready to basically end this woman's life. And then into frame, you just see from about maybe the calf down, someone steps into frame. You can see a foot in a sandal with the robe hanging there, and it's Jesus. And Jesus is standing, and he steps in front of Mary Magdalene, and all of a sudden these men start backing up and they drop their rocks. It is, to me, one of the most powerful scenes in the entire movie. Again, I'm not ruining anything. You have to see it. My explaining it does it no justice. But that's really what that scene was about, is justice, and Christ as a denier of bullies and standing up for someone who maybe she was a sinner, maybe she wasn't, but was it up to those men to take it into their hands and sort of met out God's justice as they see it, or maybe just give her a chance to redeem herself, be absolved of any sins she might have had, or maybe have her name cleared because somebody lied about her? That's kind of what I see in Christ stepping up in front and guarding her and making sure that these men stood down, which they do. And that's something that I feel is very much missing in so much of the uh, outward, I don't want to say performance, outward portrayal of many of the Abrahamic religions these days. You know, if ultimately God is your judge, well, who the hell are you to pick up a rock and think you're going to stone somebody? You don't know. You know, even if you do, okay, then their blood is on your hands. And what if you're wrong? And again, you're not God. And, you know, what if that person was innocent? Plus, you do things like stoning, beheading, any type of execution. You're robbing that person of the opportunity to make themselves right with God, right? So again, fuck off. And that's what Jesus got these, frankly, pieces of shit to do. Fuck off. You are not God. You will not take this woman's life. She has her own life to live. You know, ultimately, you know, Mary Magdalene became, you know, one of Jesus' followers, and that's one of the more beautiful scenes. Again, it's not even that long. You know, my explanation of it is probably 4 times longer than the actual flashback. That's just one that really stuck with me. Um, and again, it's sort of a interesting little breather and relief from all the violence. And this movie is violent, and I'm not opposed to violence in film. I also think that the use of the violence and the portrayal of violence, while it is really hard to watch, I don't think is in any way flagrant. I don't think it's salacious or sensational at all. It is necessary. And I think that people who watch this film, you know, when you see what this man went through and you see how he stood up for people that he loved, how he stepped up, he stood up for just people. Remember that when you go to judge someone in your life, somebody who you think, you know, because there's so much going on. Again, I'm trying not to talk about this. There's so much going on in the culture, you know, whether you are conservative right MAGA and you're convinced that immigrants are, just get rid of the immigrants, everything would be fine. Or you're, left progressive woke and you're just absolutely convinced that if we just got rid of all the men or we got rid of all of the business people, that somehow life would be better. Of course, both sides are out of their fucking mind. None of that is the case. Um, maybe we all need to give each other a little bit of grace. And that seemed to be what I saw Christ giving Mary Magdalene in that scene, what he seemed to be teaching throughout the film. Love each other above all else. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you tolerate everything. But again, as someone who grew up Christian, specifically Catholic, I remember growing up and seeing so much of Christianity being used as a weapon against people, against gay people, against women, against non-Christians. And that just never seemed to gel with how I understood Jesus. I always saw Jesus and still see Jesus, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm a bad Aristotelian. I see him as someone that you could talk to, that someone, you know, like out of all the teachers in your school or wherever you are, that he would be someone that it's like, okay, you know what? You might judge me, but he'll at least let me talk. He'll at least let me get it off my chest. He'll at least let me maybe talk to me and help me figure out whether, you know, what I'm feeling or thinking is wrong or right. Again, maybe that's the wrong view of Christ. I don't think it is. Christ to me seems to be, he's supposed to be salvation, right? He's supposed to be someone that you can trust and allow you to be, safe, a place that someone who's compassionate. Now, maybe he's not going to endorse, well, you murdered someone, or you stole this, or you hit her, or whatever it is. Yeah, certainly, I don't think that he would endorse any of those things. Again, I don't think it's about tolerating everything, but I also don't think that he'd be outside of a hospital with a bunch of holy rollers telling people inside that hospital who are dying of AIDS that they deserve it. No way. That's not what I got from the Gospels and from my education. He seemed to me to be the type of guy who's probably inside that hospital at somebody's bedside who was terminally ill from cancer, terminally ill from AIDS, or whatever it might be. The whole idea of Christ returning as judge. It's like, okay, maybe he will, maybe he will, but how do you know that you're not going to be the one to face judgment? It's so interesting to me. You've got these people out there that seem to portray Christ as a warrior, which he objectively is not. There's nothing in the Gospels that says that Christ was a warrior. He willingly went to his death, whether I agree with that or not, ethically, metaphysically, whatever, to wash away the sins of the world. It doesn't make sense if you read the Gospels that, okay, here's a man who willingly went to his death and did not fight back, for people 2,000 years later to be saying, yeah, he's kind of like a prize fighter. I think there's this guy, Mark Driscoll, who thinks that Christ is a type of prize fighter. Jesus never boxed. Jesus never did MMA. Yeah, he tipped over some tables and had some, sharp words to say for the money changers, but, he wasn't conquering anything. If anything, he was ministering, he was comforting, he was showing compassion to the sick, he was clothing the naked, he was, comforting the ill, the people that had been cast out of society, like Mary Magdalene. He was showing love and kindness and compassion to those people and giving them the opportunity to renew themselves and to improve and overcome whatever shortcomings or frailties that they had. That seems to be more accurately the Christ that I understand. And what's great about Passion of the Christ is you see that. Again, I find Mel Gibson, at least based on my understanding of Christianity, from my own upbringing as a Catholic, and just as someone who's casually sort of dipped my toe back into studying religion, it kind of seems like he nailed it on this. Again, feel free to disagree with me in the comments below, but yeah, he seems like a really kind man who said, again, above all, we should love each other. And you can kind of see where whether it be a religious establishment, political establishment, or even corporate establishment, they might not like that. There's so much of social media that it used to be that sex sells. It's not anymore. It's rage sells. So much of our algorithms and what we're being fed is it seems like it's trying to kick our dander up and get us mad and constantly, angry about stuff and going off about this, that, or the other thing. Not to say that there aren't ideas, concepts, and real life problems that we have that we should be upset about, but you shouldn't be living in a state of that. Based on what Christ is saying in this movie, maybe we could hang out and love each other. Maybe we could be better. Maybe we could help heal each other. That's kind of what I got from it. Maybe you don't like that. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But I felt very moved by these portrayals. I thought Jim Caviezel was amazing. All of them were. Monica Bellucci, Maya Morgenstern as Mother Mary. Even the Romans, they're so vicious. These soldiers that were put in charge of punishing him that kind of go a bit too far. They're stopped several times because they're basically about to kill him several times throughout this film. And they're stopped because the idea was to punish him, not to kill him. Ultimately, we know where that goes. Another scene that I found particularly moving is when Christ is at Golgotha, and he's up on the cross with the two thieves, and one of the thieves admits, "Yes, I did this. I'm a thief. I deserve to be punished for the things that I've done." And how Christ turns to him and says, basically, you're forgiven. Um, Again, compassion, forgiveness, grace. Again, whether it's supernatural or not, again, I I can't say. I'm trying to judge this film as a story, as a work of art with messages and themes, and those are the things that I pull out of it. Again, those particular scenes of Christ forgiving the thief on the cross, the flashback of Christ protecting Mary from the mob, and how many mobs are out there these days, especially online, people who just attack and want to destroy people's lives before they actually know the facts of the matter. So there's just so many parallels to the things that we're still doing today, and I do think that there are lessons in this film. The last scene in the movie that is quite moving, and again, if you don't want this spoiled, change the channel now, come back to it later. But ultimately, it ends with the resurrection, and that's really powerful. Whether you believe that happened or not, the cinematic visual portrayal of the physical resurrection of Jesus is so beautifully done, and again, I found it very moving. For me, it's kind of a metaphor. Was it metaphor or allegory? I don't remember which. That rebirth is possible. That you can transcend your difficulties, your challenges. You can redeem yourself from the maybe less than good things that you've done. Again, that maybe not necessarily in a Christian ethic, because again, I'm Aristotelian, but there is always room for improvement. You can make errors and you can correct them. You can be better. And that's what I drew from that final scene. Of course, it's Jesus coming back from the dead. You can see the holes in his hands, and he walks away, and then fade to black. It's so powerful. And again, I've seen this movie twice now. I probably will watch it again because the cinematography is by Caleb Deschanel. Fantastic. The acting, the writing. I can't imagine what type of work went into just having to teach all of the actors languages that they don't speak. Jim Caviezel obviously doesn't speak Aramaic. I'm sure that a lot of the Italian actors, while they're Italian, probably don't speak fluent Latin. So again, those details, that absolute devotion to it, really, I think, made all the difference. And love him or hate him, I got to give Mel Gibson credit for creating an incredible film about something that is incredibly important to him. And I think it's a great piece of cinema that everybody should watch, whether you're a believer or a non-believer. There's a lot of takeaways in this film. It's can be very violent, and it really can show the worst part of human nature, but it also shows some of the best. And the triumphant qualities of love and grace and forgiveness, and standing up to bully assholes when they try to stone a woman to death, whether they have the facts right or not. It's not for them to judge. I mean, they can judge all they want, but you can't kill someone, bottom line. So good on you, Jesus. So yeah, that's all I've got for this one. I think, again, it's a beautiful film. I'm really excited for the resurrection that is going to be, if not already in production now. I thought I had read somewhere that the resurrection was going to be made. Like Jim Caviezel is also renewing his role as Jesus, so I'm sure some CGI will be done there, because it's been 21 years since Passion of the Christ dropped. But I heard clips of Mel Gibson, I think, on Joe Rogan, talking about how they're going to sort of show that metaphysical, mystical journey that Christ goes through uh, within the resurrection. So, that sounds super interesting to me. Again, I dig all that stuff, that sort of high, sort of religious cosmology, theology stuff. I find it all very interesting. So I have no doubt he'll knock it out of the park again, because the guy really cares about it. And he's sort of outside of the system that will tell him that he can't do it. One last note about this before we go. This movie is just really rich and just beautifully done. And they did it on $30 million in 2004. Box office, 612 million. That's poof. And again, I think it's amazing how many people were down on this movie and didn't want it made. It's crazy how ideology can keep an entire industry from wanting to make money. So the guy just did it himself. And so that's another lesson for anybody who's any type of independent creative, or any person who wants to strike out on their own. Trust yourself. Do what you need to do and stay true to your vision, because these folks, laughed all the way to the bank and nobody wanted to touch it. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there. So yeah, guys, let me know what you think. Am I right? Am I wrong? What did you take away from The Passion of the Christ? Comment below. And if you've held on this long, please like, share, subscribe. I appreciate your view. I appreciate your time. And I'll see you in the next one.